So, let's dive into the organized chaos, the neon-soaked wonder that is Tokyo. I mean, it's the largest metropolis on Earth, a place that's in constant motion, just full of these fascinating contradictions. So how in the world do you build, and maybe more importantly, how do you run a city on this kind of scale?
You know, this quote just absolutely nails it. When you think of Tokyo, you think of that overwhelming, futuristic landscape. But here's the crazy part, the real paradox. For all of that intensity, it is one of the safest, most stable places in the entire world. It's this wild mix of high-octane energy and just this profound sense of public safety.
And look, when we talk about density, we are not kidding. Greater Tokyo is home to over 37 million people. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of Canada. Personal space? Well, it's a real luxury. And yet somehow, it all just works. There's this underlying courtesy that makes this immense human pressure not just manageable, but actually livable. It's the ultimate example of organized chaos.
You know, to really get how Tokyo functions today, you have to look at its brutal past. The city's identity isn't preserved in ancient buildings. Nope, it's defined by this relentless culture of scrap and build, a constant cycle of total destruction and radical reinvention.
And this cycle, it's been going on for centuries. We're talking major fires, catastrophic earthquakes, and of course, the firebombing of World War II. All of them have forced the city to basically start over from nothing but ashes. But let's just zoom in on one of these for a second. The 1923 Great Kanto earthquake. It was a massive 7.9 magnitude quake. But the shaking itself, that wasn't the real killer.
No, the real killer was fire. In that 1923 quake, over 90% of the more than 100,000 deaths were caused by the massive firestorm that came after. Think about it. Overturned stoves igniting the city's dense wooden houses, creating these terrifying whirlwinds of fire that just incinerated everything in their path. And then, just 2 decades later, an even worse man-made inferno showed up. The firebombings of 1945 actually killed more people than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. This relentless cycle of destruction and rebirth from the ashes is what really cemented that scrap and build mentality deep into the city's DNA.
So what do you do if your city is just built with the expectation of disaster? How do you even prepare for that? Well, you engineer for the inevitable. You build to survive, and that whole philosophy is baked into the city's modern architecture.
And this is the stark reality for Tokyo. The city is overdue for its next major quake. Experts have calculated a 70% chance of a massive one hitting within the next 30 years. This isn't some far-off fear. It's literally the core planning principle for every single thing they build.
And the solution they came up with is just brilliant. It mixes the ancient with the brand new. Take the Tokyo Skytree, for example. To make it earthquake-proof, engineers actually looked back centuries to traditional 5-story pagodas. They adapted this ancient idea of a central pillar, the Shinbashira, and created a modern concrete core for the Skytree. It acts as a counterweight, swaying out of phase with the main tower to absorb those seismic shocks. But it's not just earthquakes, not anymore. Climate change is bringing a whole new threat, water, and lots of it, in the form of super typhoons and these intense guerrilla storms. And this is their incredible solution. The GCANS project. They call it the Underground Flood Cathedral, and it's one of the most ambitious flood control systems anywhere on Earth. It channels floodwater through this network of huge underground silos and tunnels, and then uses jet-powered turbines to pump 200 tons of water per second safely out into a major river. It is a truly breathtaking feat of engineering.
Okay, so they've engineered against nature. But what about the daily challenge of just managing 37 million people? Well, that requires mastering the human system.
See, the city's entire approach to resilience is built on this fascinating 3-part cultural idea. First, there's Jijo, which is self-protection. You've got your own plan, your own emergency bag. Then there's Kojo, which is community reliance, neighbors helping each other out. And finally, Kojo, public assistance, trusting the professionals. By linking all 3, they create this incredibly resilient society. And that discipline, it also applies to managing the daily disaster of rush hour.
And that rush hour? Wow. We're talking a staggering 3.8 million people passing through a single station, Shinjuku, every single day. That's more than the entire population of Los Angeles, just in one train station. How do you possibly manage that? The answer is precision.
The entire transit system runs on just legendary efficiency. Trains are on time within a 5-second margin. The famous bullet trains, they're completely emptied, cleaned, and refilled in just 12 minutes.
And here's the part that always gets me. Even when a subway car is packed to 200% capacity, it is famously, almost eerily, quiet. It's this system of precision and collective calm that makes the whole city function. But this finely tuned human system is now facing a new, slow-motion crisis.
A huge demographic shift is on the horizon. By 2065, nearly 40% of Japan's population will be 65 or older, and that puts enormous pressure on a shrinking workforce. So who's going to run this incredibly complex city? Well, Japan's answer is really two-pronged: a massive push into robotics and AI to boost productivity, and a pretty radical change to its historically super strict immigration policy, strategically opening the door to international workers for the first time.
And that really brings us to the big final question here. Tokyo has proven over and over that it can survive disaster. But can it survive its own success? You see, with all that economic prosperity come brand new challenges. A perfect example is waste. That same post-war economic miracle that rebuilt the country also created this massive culture of consumption, making Japan the world's second largest consumer of plastic packaging per person, a huge problem for a crowded island nation.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it clashes with this traditional Japanese concept called moto-nai. It's this deep-seated cultural feeling of regret about waste. It's all about treasuring resources, a value that's now in direct conflict with the reality of modern consumer culture.
Just look at plastic bottles. 25 billion are produced in Japan every single year. And yeah, recycling rates are high, but nearly 4 billion of those bottles are still incinerated, put in a landfill, or lost annually. So even with this incredibly sophisticated system, where citizens sort their waste into more than 30 different categories, the sheer volume of consumption is the real challenge.
And that leaves us with this final powerful question. Tokyo has survived fire, earthquakes, war. It has mastered engineering and social order on a scale that is almost unimaginable. But the challenges of its own success, consumption, waste, demographics, these are a whole new kind of test. The city that has perfected the art of the comeback now has to figure out how to master sustainability. And that, well, that is a story that is still being written.